Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to another webinar that Kathy Krechauf is doing for us. If you haven't met Kathy, I knew her in her previous role. I'm so delighted that she's able to join us. She recently retired from the Finley Hancock Foundation, and she's also a recipient of one of the philanthropy awards. We were just talking about National Philanthropy Day, so she is very accomplished in her work and has a lot to share. This is the second webinar that Kathy is doing for the center. It's the same topic, but the focus and the filter was different. You may or may not have attended the previous seminar, which was the focus on small nonprofits. And then this one is really addressing some of the opportunities and challenges for large nonprofits. And when we were talking and designing this, we just felt that the challenges and circumstances and opportunities might be a little different based on the size of the organization. So without further ado, I'm going to let Kathy jump in here, and also I will be moderating the Q&A. So if you have any questions at all, please enter them at any point in time in the Q&A box. And of course, utilize the chat box to reach out to other people, and we'll be I'm expecting we'll put some links to resources along the way. Okay, so thanks, Kathy, take it away.
Thanks, Heather. It's lovely to be here today and to be with everyone. I appreciate your time and your interest in this topic. It's something that is absolutely crucial to the success of any organization, and that's having board members who are willing and ready and able to act as ambassadors for your organization. So this is, as Heather mentioned, this is geared to the slightly larger organization. So your board composition may be a little bit different. Your budget may be a little bit different. You may have more staff who are engaging with board members on a regular basis. But I think there's a through line that you'll recognize, and hopefully you'll be able to gain some practical information that you can put to work for yourself. The goals that I have for this presentation are, one, to identify some of the underlying causes of board disengagement, and then try to get some common ground around what does it mean to have an engaged board? What are we looking for, and what are we hoping and expecting that individual board members will do, and the board as an entity will do? And then, as I said, offer some practical tips to get there. So the first thing I want to say is you're not alone. The concerns about board engagement go across the entire spectrum of the nonprofit sector, large, small, regardless of the specific industry that a nonprofit may be working in. There's an organization called Wrapup. They compile surveys about board governance and trends in boards and nonprofits. And in 2018, they completed a survey about board engagement, and they were so intrigued by what they found, they repeated it and targeted the survey again more tightly in 2019, right around the notion of engagement. And what they found was that 60% of board members report they have no interaction or communication with each other or with the organization between meetings. Less than 60% had more than 70% attendance at meetings. So a struggle to get the board to participate even in the most fundamental way, which is attending meetings. Only 15% reported that board members assisted with introductions. And by that, they mean a warm introduction, where they would personally make the effort, take the time to introduce the senior staff or program leaders or development staff to individuals in their network. And then only 18% of organizations track key performance indicators for engagement, participation, and fundraising, and or regularly give feedback to their boards about their performance on those key engagement indicators. And about half reported that the director or a few board members tend to dominate most of the discussions. And I think, we can all sit back and know and nod our heads and say, yes, that is much more the typical situation that we've all experienced in our work with boards. However, most board members are willing to share their social media, and they are willing to share and introduce folks at networking and social events. So even though there's not a lot of activity around introductions, there is some willingness to share. And I think that's something that we need to look at and build on. That's the bright spot in the data. So I just want to stress that you're not doing it wrong, and you're not alone. It is absolutely endemic in the field. So why is it so important to have a board member who's ready and willing and equipped to serve as an ambassador? Well, first of all, it's credibility. And I think we all know that. And anyone who's involved in fundraising knows that, of course, as a staff member, it's your job to be the spokesperson and the advocate for your organization or for the programs that you deliver. But having a third party, that independent board member who has come onto your board, has learned about your programming, and is now wants to talk with other people about it, that is an incredible boost of credibility to your message and to what you're trying to achieve. Also, these board members can give you abundant visibility. Most boards are somewhere in the 7 to 10 to 12 member range. If you multiply that out just in terms of their networks and their the potential they have to visibly support your organization in their networks, it has a tremendous multiplier effect across all sorts of networks. And also, you want them to have positive relationships with your organization. And by doing so, that gives a nice halo. It creates the opportunity for more positive relationships in the community or with constituents or possible funders. And last but not least, they can help you be credible, informed advocates for your programming. There's nothing that's more impressive than having a board chair or a board treasurer attend a meeting and really advocate on behalf of the organization. It lends all those things, those credibility, that visibility, and that positive relationship. So certainly it's something that is worth investing in and worth putting some thought into, having these tools and this circle of positive relationships around your organization. So let's talk about what typically happens, though. And let's think back to a board meeting that you may have been part of either recently or sometime in your past, and think about what happened at that board meeting. Did you experience, as part of that meeting, a fear of criticism? Was there an unwillingness to take risk or to make decisions that might put the organization's relationships or finances or programs somewhat at risk, or to even consider doing something that might have some risk associated with it? Did you find that after the meeting that people made negative assumptions about people and their motivations, that they said or felt things like, I don't know what the problem is with Joe. He's always like that. Why does he always say no? Or why is this person always blocking suggestions? Or what is it about this individual that they're so difficult to work with? I think another frustration we've all felt is that you're in a meeting and you know that a board member has some skills and experiences that could be so helpful to your organization, and yet for whatever reason they're unwilling or reluctant to share those and to impart their experiences into the organization. As we've already mentioned, I'm sure it's very common to have a meeting dominated by one or two voices. And if the director or the CEO weren't talking during a meeting, it would probably be crickets. And I think that's a very common experience. And then the other issue, as the survey pointed out, the low attendance, either you or board members not wanting to come to meetings, dreading meetings, that sense of, oh no, not another meeting. And with that, just avoidance of engagement with members, just not wanting to be in the circle or engaged with people who are on your board, or they with each other. These are very familiar and very common situations that come out of boards, and they are symptoms of a larger underlying issue, and that issue very simply is lack of trust. Now, what I mean by that is not lack of trust as in criminality, or that someone is going to be untrustworthy per se, but it's the lack of interpersonal trust, the lack of knowledge about each other and empathy toward each other as human beings who are sitting around that table and trying to work through thorny issues, but without an underlying platform of trust and knowledge about each other as individuals. So what I want to talk a little bit about here is a model that Patrick Lencioni first put forward. It's been a few years now with his book that was a runaway bestseller in the business world, and it was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And what he points out to is that at the bottom of all positive teams, there is a presence of trust. And when that trust is not there, then you have a group of people who will avoid conflict. Now, conflict has a lot of negative connotations around it. And perhaps a better word would be to say there's fear of healthy debate, fear of disagreement, or fear of having opinions or ideas that are in conflict with what might be, on the table at that time. This in turn leads to a lack of commitment because you now have a person who is not feeling very comfortable about expressing themselves. They really don't want to have conflict with people that they don't know very well. And so decisions get made without their commitment. They have no buy-in into the decision at that point. Then again, this cascades then to avoidance of accountability. Board members who will not hold themselves accountable, will not hold each other accountable. And then ultimately you have inattention to results, and that sense of being in a board meeting, having made a decision, trying to put that decision into action. A year has gone by, 6 months have gone by, and nothing has happened. And this is the cycle that Lencioni lays out. I think that the challenge that we have when we're looking at our boards is to remember that they are a team, and you're bringing them into the room, but you're not giving them the tools, the time to go through the work that's needed to lay the platform for performing at a higher level. How do you know if you have a high performing team or a high performing board? Do you have board members who are willing to ask questions and who appreciate and tap into the expertise of their fellow board members or staff? Do you spend time at meetings focusing on issues, not on board member or staff behavior? Is there engagement and constructive debate during meetings? Are people focused on improving the program, improving the response, improving the quality of the information that's being brought forward through constructive debate during meetings? And are your board members willing then to commit to those priorities? And with that, is there a willingness to be held accountable for their part of those priorities. They're part of attaining those priorities. And then ultimately, is there a willingness to look at results? If you can say yes to those items, then I commend you, and I would say keep doing whatever you're doing, because you are in board and team nirvana. But this is very difficult to achieve, and I don't want to leave you with the idea that there's a quick fix, or that if we just do one or two things that we can achieve this. But we can do a better job at setting the table for our boards and our board members to make them and our organizations more successful. So how can we do that? I would submit that it begins before you even have that first conversation with a board member. And that is to think about how you are recruiting your board members. What is your process for identifying and engaging with those prospective board members before they even get presented as a slate to be elected to your board? Is the person who's doing your recruiting the right person for the job? Usually in organizations, this falls by default to either your board chair, your chair of your governance, or your nominating committee. And there may be 3 or 4 people on that committee. But it's really important that you have the right person doing this, and at least have that person, if they're not able to themselves be engaged, enthusiastic, and mission focused, that they have with them when they are interacting with prospective board members, another fellow board member who does share these characteristics. Because right from the beginning, you are creating a norm for what level of engagement you're expecting from that prospective board member. And I think, again, if this role does default to a particular officer or committee chair, that's okay. But I think it's important then to have a backup to that person who is actively involved and engaged in the process of meeting with prospective board members. I would also submit that in a lot of organizations, and I know I'm guilty of this because we all have a lot to do, is that about 3 or 4 months before the annual meeting, we would all go, oh no, we have 3 people terming off our board. What are we going to do? It's time to get busy. And that is really less than ideal. I think that it's important that you have your committee meeting on a regular basis, and that you, again, creating a norm of consistently collecting names and talking with possible board members on an ongoing basis, and not waiting until you are up against that annual meeting or that need to present a slate of new board members, and not have the time to really think, deliberate, and talk to people in the in-depth way that you want to welcome them onto your board. So I think the first thing in your process is to look at your committee and have that committee meet on an ongoing basis. Perhaps it's just quarterly, but again, to create a norm that you are consistently collecting names and engaging with people, even though you don't have a vacancy at that very moment. I know that you're all here with larger organizations, and I'm going to assume that you all have a board member matrix that focuses on the skills and knowledge that you need for your organization. If you don't have one, in the materials that I provided to the center is a sample of a board skills matrix that can help you get started. I think in this time too, greater awareness and sensitivity to the fact that we have not, as organizations, done a good job advancing diversity and inclusion. I think this is a great opportunity to pull that matrix out and look at the skills and knowledge that you're searching for, but also look at that through a diversity and inclusion lens. There is absolutely no reason to not have a board that represents your community, your constituency, in all of its gender and racial complexity.
Kathy, we do have a question around that.
Absolutely.
Would you recommend that you also actively, openly discuss equity issues in this process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's a conversation that has to flow through every aspect of the organization. And board recruitment is crucial in this. There are so many beliefs. I ran into this myself, as a female, trying to, and when I first came on to a particular board, there were no women on that board. It was a board of 9 and there were no women. And I said to myself, where are all the women? I know there are women in this community who are fine leaders, who represent, what this organization is trying to achieve. And yet the men had blinders on. And why was that? Because they weren't thinking about what that board looked like in the community and what message that sent to the community, about what we accidentally were signaling was women don't count in leadership roles. And that was absolutely not true, but it has to be addressed. Absolutely has to be addressed. So continuing on, again, as I've already alluded to, what is being said at those recruitment meetings? In large organizations, I think, there's a tendency, we want to have the quote captains of industry, the top person at the law firm, the senior VP of HR, on our boards, those sorts of things. And the death blow to engagement is indicating in that recruitment session or at any time through this process that, and I've heard this said, it's really not that much work. It's really not that much work. Don't worry about it, because we're giving the signal that what we're asking them to do isn't important, and we're giving them permission right at the front end of their relationship to disengage. And the fact of the matter is, it is time consuming. It is important work, and we want them to take it seriously. So be very careful about what you're signaling when you're talking with prospective board members, that you are holding firm to the idea and the belief this is important work. Your organization is an important organization doing important things to benefit the community. And to signal that less than that type of commitment is okay is really doing a disservice to that person, to your board, and to your organization. I'm going to assume that everyone has a board member job description, and you probably have committee descriptions and those sorts of things. Pull them out. I know that they don't get looked at very often, but you need to pull them out. And if you have a governance or nominating committee, have that committee take a look at them and challenge them. Do these written documents really lay out clearly the expectations that we have in terms of engagement and participation? Because this, again, is something that the prospective board member may only look at once at that time when you're recruiting them, but it's critical that you have that commitment before them right from the very beginning. The next bullet, I've heard people say this. The idea that we want to have a prestigious board, we want to have a board that's influential, we want to have a board that looks a certain way. Don't do it. Just don't do it. It's insulting. It's undermining. And in the end, it just doesn't work. And I think the other thing that I see is, are you screening for experience and management acumen? In smaller organizations, it's often the case that board members have never served on a board before. And so those individuals need more of the coaching and teaching about the fiduciary roles, et cetera. In a larger organization, you're probably looking at board members who have prior board experience. It's very important also that they have some management experience as well. I think as you get into more and more complex organizations, that if your board members aren't able to read a balance sheet, if your board members are struggling to follow your dashboard, if they are not comfortable with your evaluation or your program reports, you need to stop and give them that training, that information, that education. And the thing that you don't want to do is, and this again happens quite a bit, I think, with smaller startup organizations, you tacitly give the impression that you'll take any warm body. And it becomes a process of who knows who, and somebody's sister, and my neighbor down the street, and the person who's I'm on a committee with. And again, in your organizations, that is, you're just setting yourself up for frustration and failure. So what are some things that you can do that will build and create these relationships? You've got the person on board now. They understand what some of the norms are. You've lived some of those norms for them in terms of the way they were recruited. Are you giving board members an opportunity to learn a little bit about each other as human beings? Do you ever provide or ask them to provide information that gives them common ground with other people around the table? You don't know, the person that you just recruited may be feeling very intimidated by people or a person who also sits on your board. And it goes a very long way to give folks a little bit of common ground. So what about their family? Where'd they go to school? Do they have pets? Were they in the same fraternity or sorority? Did they both start out as brokers at the same firm at some point in the past? These sorts of things. And it's important to circulate that and give that information to new members, but also periodically circulate it on an annual basis when new members join. Now, another thing that you can do, at least on an annual basis, and perhaps this is something you'd want to do at a retreat or at your first board meeting after you bring board members on, and that is to stop for a minute and ask each person to introduce themselves briefly and articulate their why. Why are they involved in your organization? Why is it important to them? Why is it supporting it one of their priorities in the community? Let them talk to each other and lift each other up about why they are there. It will make a tremendous difference in terms of the level of engagement. Sounds corny? Use name tags, especially if you have a large board, especially when you bring new people on. I tend to make the assumption that people know each other. You know, they don't. And you'd be surprised how you'd think that certain people would have known each other just because of living in the same community for 20 or 30 years. Frequently, they don't. It's okay to use name tags, and especially when you have new people coming onto the board. And if you don't want to use name tags, maybe put a name plate with a little fold over that they can put in front of themselves that just have their first name on it, so that people don't have that hesitation and in terms of speaking with each other. And it helps everyone get more familiar with each other.
So
Again, take time. Yes.
Kathy, Stephen has his hand up, so I'm Stephen, open your mic.
Hi, Steve.
Stephen, go ahead.
You're muted. Hi, Steve.
I did not mean to hold my hand up. I'm so sorry. That was not intentional.
Well, I will lower your hand. Anybody can know that at any point in time you can raise your hand and we will open your mic. Mute yourself again, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay. I've already talked a lot about taking time for introductions. I think it's also important to provide some dedicated social time to your board. One of the things that we started doing when I was at the foundation was they had our annual meeting in the late afternoon, and we would invite the board to stay for dinner and have dinner together with their wives and a few members of the staff. And it was something that they really looked forward to, just a chance to debrief from the annual meeting, get acquainted with any new members who might have been brought onto the board at that time, talk with their spouses, share information. It wasn't as if we were creating an additional activity or an additional event. We were tacking something on to an activity that was already happening. Some organizations really are more informal, and they like the idea of the happy hour. And these can be great, especially if there's a celebration of an organizational milestone, just the opportunity for people to get together, to celebrate something that they've shared, and get to know each other on a more informal human basis, rather than around a table once a quarter. And I think the theme here is not making this overly complicated, but looking for opportunities in things that you're already doing to just add that nuance of what can we do to help these individuals build the relationship. So I mentioned that in smaller organizations, they may have board members who've never served on a board before. There is some data that suggests that lack of knowledge about how a board works is a huge red flag. If you have an individual who has never served on a board before, or perhaps has never served on a hospital board before, or a foundation board before, their lack of knowledge is a huge hurdle for them to get over in terms of building engagement. It's critical that as you look at your onboarding process for new board members, that you explicitly factor in and set aside time, and you may even want to schedule that time when that person comes in for their orientation for a follow-up. That lack of engagement because they don't know what's going on or they don't understand is much more prevalent than you might believe. Because again, who wants to be that person in the room who doesn't know what's going on? So it's very, very critical. I think it's also helpful to provide your board, and I'm sure you already do this, to provide them in between board meetings, especially if you're only meeting on a quarterly basis or every other month, that there is some ongoing contact between the organization and the board with an article, access to training, a webinar, and again, nothing that has to be time consuming, a 30-minute webinar, a 2 or 3 page article regarding board service, news about the particular industry that you're in, can go a tremendous way in terms of bringing those newer board members and even some of your current board members closer to the organization and more engaged. Again, with representing larger and more complex organizations, I know that you do this, but I'm always surprised the number of organizations that don't. And that's getting that information out well in advance to those board members and creating the norm that they will have reviewed it, and if they have any questions, they will have taken care of those questions before the board meeting. There's nothing more disheartening to walk into a board meeting and that person is just ripping open the envelope on their packet or searching on their laptop or their iPad for the PDF of the information that you sent them. Again, this is about creating expectations and creating norms. Another thing that's often missing is any guidance from the director or the CEO about the information. Sending an inch thick packet of charts and graphs and reports can make everyone on your team as a staff feel like they've done their job, they've delivered that piece of information to their board or to their CEO. But without guidance about what's important, what's going to be discussed, what is something they need to pay attention to because it's going to be an action item, you need to give your board a roadmap to going through that information. It can be just a few paragraphs. I know some CEOs do lengthy reports to their board, but there needs to be some sort of guidance. The third point here is the agenda needs to provide for meaningful discussion. A traditional agenda has the new business at the end of the meeting. When you have busy people on a tight timeline, by the time you get around the clock to that almost the end of the meeting time, people have already checked out. I am a big advocate of putting the action items at the top of the agenda, and any sort of reports or routine information follows below that, typically in written form. But you want people, when they get to the meeting, they're fresh, they're focused. That's the time to bring up that new information, or to have that meaningful discussion, or to have the conversation and decision making, not at the end of the meeting when you're starting to lose a quorum and folks are checking their phones. One model for an agenda that I found that I thought was interesting and you might want to consider is called the Hindsight, Foresight, Insight model. And the idea is that your board agenda is put into, I would call them chunks. So you have your committee reports, your program reports, those are all written at the end. Then you have your foresight. These are the things that you want your board to pay attention to. What are the trends? How are you doing against benchmarks? What are changes going on in your operating environment that are important for them to understand and would have significant impact on your programming or your finances? And then some time on the agenda for insight to perhaps, at the top of the meeting, remind folks, this is our mission, this is our vision, to have a conversation about succession planning, to have your nominating committee or your governance committee make a periodic report on what they're doing in terms of making sure that they have a pipeline of solid candidates for your board. What opportunities do you have to talk about strategic partnerships, changing needs, long-term goals? Often those things don't get discussed because we're spending so much time dealing with other matters, and by the time we get to the real meat of what's needed to be discussed for the organization, you've already lost your board members' attention. I'm a proponent of committees. Not that anybody needs more committees to manage, but they do create a smaller, more informal opportunity for people to get to know each other and to build that relationship. So if you think about those committees, that committee time as part of building engagement, you can change and think about how you're managing the committee work. It's a perfect teaching moment. Committee work comes out usually as reports or recommendations, as an opportunity to bring accountability into your board meeting, that this committee has a deliverable and that they're going to hold themselves accountable to deliver that report or that recommendation. It puts committee chairs on the agenda in a speaking role. And that in itself is going to increase their engagement in the work. If they know that they are going to make the report and not defer to you or the CEO to make that report, it's critical that you put them in that role and give them that opportunity. And it also creates a dynamic, again, that holds board members responsible and accountable. It's not you making that report. It's not you making that recommendation. It's the board is saying this is the direction that we want to go, and then holding itself accountable. Now, the big question then also is fundraising. And there's so much written about this. And I just want to bring a couple points to the forefront. Help your board members, even your seasoned board members, understand what fundraising is and isn't. So often, in giving feedback or setting expectations for board members, we focus only on the ask. And we only give feedback on the ask, and that's how many people we talked to and how much money have we raised. However, I would suggest that it's just as important to invite someone to a tour of your facility, to bring someone to one of your events, to share their involvement with your organization on their social media, and for them to be willing to share the names of individuals who might have an affinity for your mission. All of these behaviors have value and should be respected and acknowledged by your organization. And you can demonstrate that value by periodically aggregating and giving feedback to your board on an ongoing basis. So, for example, you have an event and you notice or you tabulate and you think you're ready for this in advance. You tabulate and you were able to report to your board, you had this event and 70% of board members, let me back up, 100% of your board attended and 70% of your board members brought a guest. That opens the conversation then to what can we do to get 100% of our members attending and 80% of our members bringing a guest, 90% of our members bringing a guest. But without that feedback, they'll never know. It's invisible. So look for some key performance indicators that you can track in a very simple way and give that feedback to the board. Let them know how they're doing. And I think you'll see more engagement around some of these other behaviors, in addition to keeping information about who's asking and how many dollars have been raised. So to wrap it all up, I would suggest that as you think about your board and your board engagement, that you look at it as an ongoing process, either quarterly or annual, that you periodically review the board member job description during a board meeting and talk about what it means or whether or not it still matches what you currently expect. To add on to something you're already doing, a mixer or some other social opportunity that would bring people together in a less formal environment. Give people information about each other that is not just focused on their professional life, but gives a little more of their humanity and allows people to find and build connections that they might not know exist. Within the board, right from the very beginning, establishing those expectations about membership, attendance, giving, networking, or whatever performance indicators that you might decide are relevant for your organization, and then report back to the board in an aggregate form how they're doing on these performance indicators. Again, it's time consuming, it's not episodic, it's ongoing, and it takes leadership from the top. So as you think about this, it's not only the CEO, it's also your board chair, making sure that they're committed to this idea, to this slightly different model of bringing boards into a more engaged way of functioning. But it has to be modeled from the top. And it's like building a high performing team. You're going to have setbacks. Things aren't always going to go as well as you wish they had, but it is an ongoing part of the board culture and a part of the way that you and your organization approach board membership. And so I would say, just to wrap up, that you can do it. I'm not suggesting you turn everything upside down, But again, just looking at those opportunities you have to build those relationships and in turn build that that level of engagement with your organization. So Heather, I'm going to turn it back to you. And if I have questions, I'd love to hear them. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I hope everyone agrees. Does she pack a lot of content into a short period of time? And I know that's because, Kathy, you have a lot of experience that you can draw upon and help our nonprofit leaders. So yes, if you have any questions, why don't you go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or even in the chat feature, it's fine. I do want to highlight a couple of things for you. If you can let me screen share, can you?
Sure.
Turn that
oh, now you're making me do something. Okay.
Okay.
Stop share. There we go.
Okay. All right. So a couple of things. Let's go to our website. And hang on a second here. Okay, so if you've been on our website, you know it's jam-packed with hundreds and hundreds of resources. So just to make it really easy for you, when you go up into these three bouncing balls here, and you go to Getting Help, and you click on Running a Nonprofit, one of the things that you'll find is right in the middle is the graphic for board governance and best practices checklist. If you're not familiar with this, you can download it at no cost. You can click on the graphic, you can click on the link over here. It has 9 sections, and each of the 9 sections has a corresponding web page chock full of resources. So one of the links that I put into your chat is the link directly to this board governance page if you'd like to bookmark that. So things like the board matrix came up today, and like there's all kinds of samples and templates. So you definitely don't have to reinvent the wheel. And if there's something you're looking for that you don't see that you would like, you can go back to Getting Help. And at the bottom here is a technical assistance form. So it'll take you 3 minutes or less, I promise. Just fill that out. Like you have to track my activity and the evaluation, but it also serves as first come, first serve. So that's always an option, not just on the topic of board governance. Another thing that I'd like to highlight in this area, if you're not familiar, we have a blog. So hopefully you're signed up for our e-news. If you're not, I would encourage you to get signed up for that because all our major announcements get made there. But like you see, there's replays for Kathy's small presentation. I will be posting the replay for this one probably in a couple of days by the time we get it published and rendered, edited. One thing I wanted to highlight here is we have a great relationship with the Toledo Bar Association, particularly the pro bono division. And there is a webinar coming up on April the 1st. If anyone is looking to add attorneys or lawyers to your board, which is a very common request, one of the attorneys, he had actually done a webinar. His name is David Arnold. He'd done a webinar for TBA, and it was what lawyers should know about considering nonprofit boards. So I was talking to my contact, Maggie Humphrey, who is fabulous. And I said, what if we took that topic and turned it the other way? Because if he's training lawyers on how to vet nonprofit board opportunities, I think the nonprofits need to understand what the lawyers will be looking for. So if that's of interest to you at all, you can go ahead and get registered for that. It's the same type of format as this. It's an hour long and lots of time for Q&A. So that's on April the 1st. Also, going back to the board governance, that checklist is the most used tool that I use in TA, both for groups that want to start nonprofits and groups that want to grow and strengthen their nonprofits. Well, the fabulous consultant that worked with my predecessor is named Kathy Allen. And she came out with a new assessment, a health assessment. And I contacted her. And if you're not familiar with this format, hopefully you are, we started, let me scroll down here. For example, this that happens to be another Toledo Bar Association, but C4NPR Chats is where we video record an interview with an expert on some topic. In this case, it was, can employers mandate that their employees receive the COVID vaccine? But I'm going to have, I think next week, we're just working on the date. I'm going to be doing a C4NPR chat with Kathy Allen, and her brand is the Board Doctor. So it's very much a continuation of this discussion with Kathy. So if you're interested in that, watch for the link as it gets published. It's not something you attend. I just interview and we record it and publish the recording. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything else. Not directly related to this. I could keep you guys for hours talking, but I won't do that. Any final questions? Like, truly, you've got Kathy here. Is there anything? It doesn't have to be just on what the board discussion was today, but let me stop my share here. But anything about boards, because she has a pretty broad, a very broad background in the area. Okay, so final call for any questions. No?
If I might say, I do have a website, and I am also blogging regularly now, and also linking back to the Center for Nonprofit Resources as well. So you can find me on the internet at onpointphilanthropy.com. And I've recently started tweeting, which so I'm also on Twitter at onpointphilanthropy, and you can find me there. But for more long form or more in-depth information, check out my website and look at the blog. And I'm also will soon be putting up a way for folks to subscribe if they want to know when I put up new blog topics as well. And this is certainly one that I will be blogging about soon.
Wonderful. You could probably get a couple of blog posts out of this one. It's pretty rich.
I think so.
Yeah, and Sylvia, thank you for your comment. Very helpful, Kathy. I'm a new board member in a small nonprofit, and I feel a lot of the things you mentioned. So, yay.
Okay, hang in there. Hang in there.
Kathy, thank you so much for joining us and lending your expertise to our community. We look forward to you visiting the center again. And for all those in attendance, if you have any questions, you can reach me at c4npr.org. Okay. You know what I realized? I didn't even introduce myself. How presumptuous. I'm Heather Bradley. I'm the director of the center. And please, if you have any questions or need some help, just reach out. Okay, everybody, have a great day.